This video is brought to you by my fantastic supporters over at Patreon. Go to patreon.com/TJTheEmperor to find out how you can support the channel.
And now for our feature presentation.
So, a little while ago, I made a video called I want to get into JRPGs but I don't know where to start, which is more or less a list of recommendations for a few good starter RPGs for anyone who may not be as knowledgeable of the genre as I am. A couple times in that video, I mentioned that I planned on making similar ones about action and strategy RPGs, but I never did because, as I'm sure you've noticed, it takes me forever to actually get around to making things. Well, that changes now, because I've got a batch of what I consider some great action RPGs for those who want to get into the genre. Before we start, however, I have a few ground rules, as is per usual with these sorts of videos. These are basically the same rules I used in my earlier JRPG recommendation video, but in case you forgot or haven't seen that video yet, here they are. First, as the title makes obvious, this video is just going to focus on action RPGs. If you're looking for turn-based RPG recommendations, here's a link to my earlier video. And as for strategy RPGs, I promise to give some recommendations someday, but it probably won't be anytime soon. Second, I'm limiting myself to one entry per franchise, otherwise this list could easily be nothing but Ys games. Third, I went out of my way to include a good mix of both 2D and 3D games, though for this list I did lean a bit heavier on the 3D stuff. Fourth, the games need to be easily accessible. Ideally, this means it's legally available for purchase on current consoles and PCs, but if that's not the case, it has to be easily emulatable. Emulatable? Is that a word? Emulate? Well, it is now. Fifth, each game needs to have a self-contained story. And sixth, each game needs to have a reasonable length, which I define as being around 40 hours or less. Although, just as was the case in my turn-based RPG video, I did skirt this rule on occasion, as sometimes a game is just too good to leave out simply because it's a bit longer than average. Alright, those are all my rules. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. My first choice is perhaps the easiest game to recommend to an action RPG newbie, and that's the original Kingdom Hearts. Now, alright, before we go any further, I know what you guys are thinking. I just got through mentioning that one of my rules for this list is that each game needs to have a self-contained story, and here I am recommending the first entry in a decades-spanning franchise that's reached mimetic status for having a plot that's, shall we say, a little bit convoluted. And yeah, guilty as charged. So here's my reason why I'm choosing to include it. As notoriously labyrinthine as the story of Kingdom Hearts becomes, I'm very much of the opinion that the first game still stands perfectly well on its own. In fact, it's refreshingly accessible compared to what it became even one game later. Protagonist Sora lives a relatively carefree life with his friends on Destiny Islands, until one night, a powerful army of eldritch horrors called the Heartless invade. Sora finds himself able to wield a powerful weapon called the Keyblade, and uses it to try and save his home. Despite this, Destiny Islands are swallowed up by the Heartless, and Sora wakes up in another world, separated from his friends. He teams up with, of all people, Donald Duck and Goofy, and the three of them begin a quest to travel to various worlds, all themed after a different Disney film, and use Sora's Keyblade to seal each world's keyhole before the Heartless consumes them. Now, I admit, Final Fantasy OCs get isekai'd into the Disney animated universe is a self-evidently ridiculous premise, but against all odds, Kingdom Hearts manages to stick the landing. As superficially corporate as the idea sounds on paper, actually playing the game, it's obvious the developers treated this like a passion project. The Disney worlds are faithfully and lovingly recreated in all their charm, the music is taken straight from the movies and given brilliant rearrangements by Yoko Shimomura. Hell, even the voice actors, for the most part, are the exact same as the movies. Honestly, that's the biggest reason why I was so adamant to include Kingdom Hearts on this list. Basically, every RPG fan likes Final Fantasy, and basically every person likes Disney's animated movies, so it's a game I feel comfortable recommending to more or less anyone. But before you get the impression that the game is nothing but Final Fantasy and Disney fan service, rest assured that it isn't. The combat system is fast-paced, challenging, and fun. Admittedly, it's not as polished as it would become in later entries, but given this was an early PS2 release, I'm willing to excuse that. Actually, the combat is that much more impressive considering Square hadn't really developed many action RPGs before Kingdom Hearts. The Mana series was the one exception, and the Mana series were still all in 2D by that point. The success of Kingdom Hearts proved Square could compete in the action realm just as successfully as they could in the turn-based realm. And I mean, look at them now. Almost every RPG Square puts out is an action RPG, something I don't think would have ever happened if Kingdom Hearts hadn't blazed that trail. For my next choice, we've got the most recently released game to appear on this list, Ys 10 Nordics. Again, this is another entry in a decade-spanning series, but worry not. Though there are occasionally connections between them, the Ys games largely stand on their own. Actually, you know what? Here, for those of you who are concerned, I'm going to give you literally everything you need to know in order to understand and enjoy any game in the Ys series. This is Adol. He's got red hair, he's good with a sword, and he's been in more shipwrecks than anyone who's ever lived. This is his best friend Dogi. He's an ex-thief who can crush walls with his bare hands. Together they travel around the world in search of adventure. There, now you can play any Ys game without feeling lost. Anyway, in this entry, Adol, Dogi, and their fellow travelers find themselves in Obelia Gulf, where they assist the fearsome Balta Sea Force in their struggle against the Grieger. Now, as one of the architects of the action RPG, including an Ys game on this list was a foregone conclusion. The question I had, then, was which one? I decided to go with Nordics for several reasons. First, as of this writing, it's the most recent Ys game, and thus the most accessible. Second, from a combat perspective, it's arguably the greatest in the entire series. Nordics saw the debut of the new cross-action battle system, which allows the player to seamlessly alternate and coordinate attacks between Adol and his shield sister Karja. It's among the smoothest and most fun battle systems I've ever experienced in an action RPG. At no point did I ever dread the notion of having to fight one more horde of angry Grieger. Presentation-wise, I mean, it's Falcom, so of course the music is great, and the graphics are gorgeously stylish. Gameplay-wise, aside from the combat we've already discussed, Falcom enhances Ys's traditional atmosphere of boundless exploration by introducing light open-world elements. You're given use of a pirate ship called the Sandras, which allows you to not only explore the islands around Obelia Gulf, but occasionally encounter enemies in the high seas. I admit, I'm not usually the biggest fan of open-world games, but Nordic's use of these elements didn't bother me. Falcom always kept the emphasis on exploring the islands on foot, and Obelia Gulf as a setting never felt overwhelming in the same way that, say, the world of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth did. The amount of content to engage with in its open world is reasonable, and most importantly, it's all fun. No flying through rings in Cosmo Canyon to be found here, for instance. All in all, Ys 10 is another masterpiece from Falcom, and it's amazing that a series that's been in development since 1987 is producing some of its greatest entries right now. Since the first two picks were both 3D games, for our third entry, we're going with one of the action RPG highlights of the SNES, Illusion of Gaia. Full disclosure, I made a full-length video on Illusion of Gaia in the past, so if you're interested in hearing me discuss the game in more detail, here's a link. But for those who are unaware, Illusion of Gaia comes from 16-bit action RPG stalwarts Quintet, who also developed Soul Blazer and Terranigma, both of which I've also made videos about, by the way. I could have easily selected either of those two for inclusion on this list as well, but I felt Illusion of Gaia was by far the easiest to recommend of the three. It's got a more robust combat system than Soul Blazer, and a more accessible story than Terranigma. That story centers on Will, a young boy living in South Cape who, after getting mixed up in a family squabble between King Edward and his daughter Princess Kara, learns he's been chosen to gather 6 magical statues in order to save the world from an evil comet. It's admittedly a somewhat basic coming-of-age story, and personally I found that the individual character moments spoke to me more than the overarching narrative, but it's still entertaining, with moments of surprising depth scattered throughout. You're going to be traveling through a gorgeous world based on our own, with dungeons based on real-life ancient ruins, including the Great Pyramids and Angkor Wat. The combat system is based around shifting between one of 3 forms, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, and each being fun to control in their own way. The progression system is also unique for its time, and honestly would still be unique even now. Instead of a traditional experience point-based system, set stat boosts are meted out after killing specific groups of enemies, who do not respawn once killed. Such a system completely respects the player's time by absolutely negating the need to grind. And respecting the player's time is one of Illusion of Gaia's strengths. The game is one of the most streamlined I've ever played, with a complete playthrough requiring no more than 15 hours at most. Those aspects make it one of the easier games on this list to recommend. The one problem with this is that it's not easily accessible to purchase, and indeed has never been easily accessible to purchase after its initial release in 1993. Thankfully, with SNES emulation being as simple as it is, anyone with even a third-rate computer can discover Illusion of Gaia with ease, and thank God for that. Next, let's go back to another fairly modern game, with Tales of Arise. Now, I know that I'm going to get some comments about this one. Not because Tales of Arise is a bad game, mind you, but because Tales fans have quite a few games they hold in very high esteem, and they're wont to make those opinions known. And I admit, because of the sheer number of games in the Tales franchise, I had to think for a while before narrowing it down to just one. I decided to go with Arise primarily for one simple reason: the combat. I like the combat in Arise better than in any other Tales game I've played. It's still got an arena-based system like its predecessors, but I felt it was smoother and way more dynamic than any of those predecessors. Admittedly, I still haven't played every Tales game yet, so that opinion should be taken with at least a few grains of salt. Aside from the satisfying combat, you've got a powerful story of resistance and rebellion, wherein the inhabitants of the world of Dana are trying to break free from the overlordship of the world of Reyna. Protagonists Alphen and Xion traverse the 5 regions of Dana in an attempt to defeat the 5 lords dominating those regions. It's a tried-and-true JRPG narrative theme, with roots extending back to at least Final Fantasy II, but Namco Bandai pulls it off very well. As for its presentation, Tales of Arise's graphics are perhaps its most notable feature, and it's not hard to see why. The game is simply stunning. The jump to Arise from its immediate predecessor, Tales of Berseria, is a quantum leap in graphical fidelity. Seriously, you're going to want to just stop what you're doing and look around and take in the sights sometimes. Combine that with a predictably top-notch score by Tales veteran Motoi Sakuraba, and you've got a game that's second to none in the presentation department. Tales is one of those franchises that's pretty much essential playing for anyone who's into action RPGs, and with Namco set to re-release and remaster more of its back catalog in the near future, there's perhaps no better time to get into it, and Arise is a great starting point. And since we just finished talking about Tales, now's a good time to recommend a game from its science fiction counterpart, Star Ocean, specifically Star Ocean: The Second Story. This is a game that's been in the spotlight quite a bit as of late, due to the positive reception of its HD 2D remake, Star Ocean: The Second Story R. Given that version is the most accessible, it's probably best to start there, although if you're more of an old school fan, you really can't go wrong with the original either. If you've never played a Star Ocean game, it's basically Star Trek the JRPG. Instead of the United Federation of Planets, Star Ocean is set in the Pangalactic Federation, a spacefaring civilization whose members are forbidden to interfere with developing worlds according to the Underdeveloped Planet Protection Pact, which is basically their version of the Prime Directive. The second story is centered on Claude Kenny, who, in his first mission as a newly commissioned ensign on the Federation, is accidentally warped to an underdeveloped planet called Expel, where a local girl named Reyna Lanford believes him to be the destined hero of light, and the two of them begin a journey to investigate a mysterious meteorite called the Sorcery Globe. Now, I fully admit the plot of this game was, to me, not anything special. Star Ocean, like Illusion of Gaia, is a series that's always excelled more at character moments, as can be seen in the private actions, for instance, than in its overarching narratives, which to me have always been somewhat standard at best. But really, you're not playing this game for the story. You're playing for the gorgeous 2D artwork, the Motoi Sakuraba soundtrack, the challenging battle system, and above all, the character customization and crafting system, which was impressively complex when it originally released and is still impressive today. Admittedly, most of these skills are basically at the mercy of the almighty RNG, and because of that, I couldn't get into it as much as others have, because so often it seemed as though I would fail whatever skill I tried to use despite how high that particular character was at performing it. In any case, even though I personally had a somewhat more annoying experience with this system, I can look at the game objectively enough to understand why so many people enjoy it. The amount of customization you can do essentially gives the game infinite replay value, and that's before even taking into consideration the fact that you can choose to play as either Claude or Reyna, and depending on what private actions you see, there are up to 99, yes, 99 different endings you can unlock. For those reasons, Star Ocean: The Second Story probably gives you the most bang for your buck of any game I've talked about in this list thus far. Next, we're going to suggest a game that most of you will consider to be an obvious choice: Nier Automata. Now, again, Nier Automata is technically another sequel to, of course, the original Nier, but much like East 10, Nier Automata can be enjoyed entirely on its own. Hell, I'm sure most fans had never even heard of, or much less played, the original Nier before playing Automata. Anyway, what makes Automata such an obvious choice is the fact that it was co-developed by Platinum Games, the standard bearers for stylish 3D action games, and their touch brings a sense of dynamism and fun the original Nier's combat was lacking. That being said, Nier Automata is the farthest thing you can imagine from a simple style over substance kind of game, although there is certainly plenty of style to go around. As is per usual with any game directed by Yoko Taro, the story is profound, centering on 2B, an advanced combat android designed by the organization Yorha to liberate the Earth from the machine life forms occupying it. Taro's narrative actively engages with themes explicitly drawn from the philosophical tradition. Indeed, several characters are named after great philosophers to further drive that point home. And honestly, it's for that reason that I was this close to not including Nier Automata on this list. See, in videos like these, I make a point to try and recommend games that aren't too narratively dense, as, understandably, not everyone is going to necessarily be in the right mental state to just jump into them right away, especially if they're a newbie. After wavering on and off for a while, I ultimately decided to include it, as a list of this kind that leaves off what's now considered one of the greatest games in its genre would just be a mistake. If you are in the mood to engage with a story of this kind, I cannot recommend Nier Automata highly enough. Between the powerful narrative, incredible combat, beautiful world, and fantastic soundtrack courtesy of Keiichi Okabe, this is one game that's more than earned its towering reputation. Last but not least, I want to recommend a game that I only finished playing just a couple months ago, Odin Sphere. Odin Sphere is the debut work from Vanillaware, who've recently made a name for themselves with 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim, and Unicorn Overlord. And much like those games, Odin Sphere boasts staggeringly beautiful 2D artwork that feels straight out of a storybook. Appropriate considering the story is framed around a little girl reading storybooks in her library. As for that story, it's a surprisingly in-depth political fantasy tale taking heavy inspiration from the Norse tradition. I mean, the name Odin is right in its title, so no surprises there. Gameplay-wise, Odin Sphere is probably the most unique on this list, as its combat draws heavily from the 2D beat-em-up tradition. You'll control 5 different characters over the course of the game, each of whom plays completely differently from the others, allowing for a fair bit of diversity and replayability. This is, at the risk of confusing you, both one of Odin Sphere's biggest blessings and curses. While I appreciated having such a diverse cast to control, you're going to be controlling them through essentially the same sets of environments over and over again, which unfortunately made the game feel quite a bit repetitive after about the second or third character. Ultimately, this is only a minor criticism, as the sheer fun I had playing Odin Sphere was able to make up for that repetitive feeling. Vanillaware may not be as big as, say, Square Enix or Namco Bandai, but the quality of their games is such that they can easily stand toe-to-toe with the genre Goliaths. Alright, so there's my list of 7 great starter action RPGs. I hope you enjoyed it. It's been a real nice change of pace to do a relatively easy video like this after all the ridiculously in-depth stuff I was working on for most of last year. I'll get back to those sorts of videos soon, don't worry. I just need a little bit of time to decompress. In the meantime, I promise I still intend on doing that list of strategy RPGs, but that one's probably going to be a bit harder because, honestly, it's hard to think of good starter strategy RPGs since most of them are, by default, much more user-unfriendly. I'll keep brainstorming though, and if you guys have any suggestions you think would be good to include on that list, leave me a comment alongside what you thought of this one. That would actually be super helpful. Alright, I'll see you guys later.